Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for coming to us on a beautiful day and a day where I believe there's a football game going on, which you're missing. So yes, my name is David Leslie. I'm Professor of Ethics, Technology, and Society at the Digital Environment Research Institute here at Queen Mary University in London. I'm also the Director of Ethics and Responsible Innovation Research at the Alan Turing Institute. So the event today is really the launch of a special issue of the Harvard Data Science Review entitled Future Shock, Grappling with the Generative AI Revolution. In particular, we did a kind of special part of the special issue called a policy forum, in which we collected basically analysis pieces, op-eds, style essays and articles from a broad range of different stakeholders. And so we have a lot of amazing contributors to that policy forum here today. Let me, if I might, just start off with a bit of housekeeping. So just to say, the event today is being live streamed and recorded. Recordings will ultimately be available on the Queen Mary website after the event. We will also actually request that participants in the audience and whatnot be considerate, respectful, and collaborative, both in the room and online. For those who are in our room here, we are not expecting any fire alarms. So if you hear one, please make your way out of the building via the emergency exit signs. We will also do a Q&A at the end of all of the presentations. The panel will take questions from the online audience via the Zoom Q&A function. So if you're online and questions come up at any point, just type them into the Q&A and we'll collect them. And we'll also have a roaming mic for the audience members here. Also, if you're attending in person, please join us for the reception afterwards. And at that reception, we will also be launching our public sector AI ethics and governance in practice platform, which is a project that's taken about 5 years of time out of the Alan Turing Institute. So with that, I just want to maybe do a bit of stage setting. So if you can please play the video, which you'll see is an actual, the opening of the actual documentary entitled Future Shock, now from over 50 years ago.
Future shock is a sickness which comes from too much change in too short a time. It's the feeling that nothing is permanent anymore. It's the reaction to changes that happen so fast that we can't absorb them. It's the premature arrival of the future.
So yes, that is Orson Welles, and the documentary is based on a book by Alvin Toffler, a sociologist, entitled Future Shock, in which he was really attempting to capture the societal dislocation that had been affected by this rapid advent of the kind of digital and computer revolution in the 1960s going into the 1970s. And I want to point two things out about that video, which are really relevant for our conversation today, and which really shaped our view of why this policy forum called Future Shock was so important. So first, if you pay attention to the way that opening scene worked, the technology itself only shows up at the very end. And that was purposeful. What the documentarians were trying to do was to emphasize, right, that future shock is a social and socio-technical phenomenon. And the way that the whole arc of that opening scene starts with all of these scenes of what Toffler called mass adaptational breakdown, right, and a shattering stress is really important. We're centering the problem of societal transformation and dislocation. That's the first thing we want to note. The second thing we should note is that future shock manifests in the scene, and I think in our lived experience today, as a kind of disturbing combination of familiarity and otherness, right? So if you think about how that scene unfolded, you had the starting point of this kind of fuzzy, soft focus on these two ambling human figures, kind of approaching approaching the camera, and there's this abrupt shift, right, from that soft, fuzzy focus to this sharp focus on these kind of, the wide-eyed glare of these kind of blonde-headed robots, soulless robots, and I think we need to think of that combination of familiarity and otherness as very relevant today, right? So on the one hand, today we have a kind of reinforcement learning driven prevalence of conversation agents that have come onto the scene now, and these agents are basically been tuned to mimic and simulate the commonplace intimacies of kinship building behavior, of fellow feeling, of interactive rapport. They've been designed, right, with all of the bells and whistles of anthropomorphic familiarity. Think about how the socio-digital space is increasingly flooded by empathy simulating chatbots and AI companions that are powered by commercial-grade large language models. So that's the familiarity. But at the same time, behind this facade of the friendly chatbot interface, these are entirely alien amalgams of unrevealed digital, physical, and human infrastructure. They're basically computational Frankensteins that are composed of inaccessible black box architectures that are wired with networks of software patches and guardrails, that are developed and run in environmentally costly data centers and on carbon-hungry cloud computing servers, that are dependent on hidden armies of ghost workers, largely from marginalized communities or from the global south, who annotate harmful content, and they're steered by large market-moving tech corporations, which operate in the shadows of global techno-industrial supply chains. And so I think that when we were putting together Future Shock, what we were thinking about is how, as the gap closes between the sort of comforting familiarity of some of the way the technology is being commercialized, the gap between that and the actual reality, the socio-technical reality of what's going on behind the scenes, that's what's behind Future Shock. So let me start our conversation today by introducing Xiaoli Meng, who's Whipple V.N. Jones Professor of Statistics at Harvard University, and he's founding editor and editor-in-chief of the Harvard Data Science Review. And Xiaoli is the man that's been behind moving this volume forward, and he'll speak a little bit about the volume as well as the Harvard Data Science Review. Go ahead, Xiaoli.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. David, thank you for really, not only creating the title, The Future Shock, but really putting together this policy forum, which is a terrific idea. For those of you who may not be familiar with Harvard Data Science Review, I just want to say a few words about why a data science journal or platform, and a platform is publishing articles on policy forum because generally people think about data science is driven by all these algorithms, the computer scientists, statisticians, and the technical side. But this is definitely a far-reaching conversation than just being, working on these technical aspects. As you probably see, the line we put there, it's Harvard Data Science Review started 5 years ago. We just celebrated the 5-year anniversary. And David, thank you for joining us. And it's really open access. It's a global forum on everything data science and data science for everyone. And so I guess this conversation about the impact of general AI is as global as it could be. And so I think it's so important for all of us get together to discuss all these issues really from there are technical issues, but there are lots of policy implications. And I'm really glad we'll be hearing directly from many authors of these policy forums. Thank you very much, as well as from all the participating audience. Just to set the scene about Harvard Data Science Review itself, I think that I don't know if you can see the next slides. Oh, sorry, I should probably just do this. Can you see the slides? Just to say that we have always been publishing a variety of articles. We have 4 major categories. Essentially, is about the general perspectives and the impact, and also a lot of our teaching, communication, as well as the foundational theory and the methods, which most people think about at the kind of a methodological side. We have all these peer-reviewed columns facing industry, government, general public, and so on and so forth. The reason I say this, other than obviously promoting Harvard Data Science Review, that I encourage as many people to read it as possible, is to really set the scene that it's very natural for us to publish the special issues on generative AI, because that's the breadth we always want to reach out to. And this is my last slides to show that we have been publishing these special issues. We had a special issue starting from the COVID-19, another, global-wise concern. And David wrote another great article there, 5 steps towards the right direction, about how thinking about the ethical considerations of, contact tracing and many other issues that, risen during this pandemic. We just published another issue on democratic data, which I encourage you to read, because it's also really a broad discussion about all kinds of issues about how private sectors, the government, and general public can work together to create data for all to use, not just a few powerful companies who happen to have money. And also, as many of you probably would appreciate, at the end of the day, data science is all about the data. Having great quality data, the data can really reflect the reality is so important. And we had a special issues on the 2020 census, data privacy issues for 2020 US Census. And I think the data privacy issues itself will be a big discussion, broadly the privacy issues in AI technology, for the general public as well. And we have a special issues on N-01 trial, another thing most people care about. But last but not least, the one we just published is this future shock ones, as you see here. Let me ending by emphasizing one point that we all these days talk about, artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, or general artificial intelligence. And I want to just emphasize that, for me at least, there's nothing really artificial about this artificial intelligence. They're truly all human intelligence. It's created by humans. It's trained on mostly human data. And now we have all kinds of issues we need to face. And we require our human intelligence to really deal with all these issues well. And particularly, there will be lots of compromise need to be made. As I think anytime you set a policy, most policies is really about, to find the right balance, right? We take the data privacy issues. We know that in order to get reliable predictions, get reliable technology, for example, autonomous vehicle drivings. We need a lot of data on human behaviors, how people drive, for example. But at the same time, we should be very mindful about the privacy issues. And as I always say, that we humans are very good at creating jobs for ourselves. Most of these issues, there's no the correct answer. There are lots of balancing we need to consider. And I think a policy plays such a big, important role to guide us, right? How do we achieve the beneficial side of all this technology, but reduce the harmful side? And of course, benefit to whom, harm to whom, that themselves is really a big part of discussion. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today, and I hope this is just a beginning, certainly for HDSR, to be the place for a lot more of these incredibly important discussions. And thank you for your participation.
So it's my great honor now to introduce Antonella Perini, who is a research associate at the Alan Turing Institute. And I'll just say, Anto has been an absolute instrumental figure in getting the policy forum out, both as a co-author of our editorial introduction and also as a reviewer and a steward of the process.
Thank you, David. And yes, well, good evening, everyone. Yes, I think the Policy Forum is a great space where, a lot of different perspectives were brought up together, and perspectives that are very much, engaged in discussions around policy and governance, open questions still related to generative AI. And as David mentioned, we kind of did this introductory editorial. It's a long piece, but with a lot of information. It's a way to kind of set the stage for the policy forum and the discussions that are brought there, but at the same time, to kind of give an overview of the global AI policy and governance landscape. So in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to talk a bit about what we present there, and at the same time, some thoughts around how the rapid industrialization of generative AI prompted future shock for the AI policy and governance community. So we start the introduction kind of saying how and why it should have not happened. We were, previous to that rapid industrialization of generative AI, we were in a context with broadening regulatory and legal regimes related to AI or adjacent to AI, such as cybersecurity, data protection, and more, that were kind of becoming to be robust, and that we would have thought that we would have been prepared to tackle some of the challenges presented by generative AI. And at the same time, there were increasing and principles, governance mechanisms, and practices that were put together to kind of ensure responsible and ethical AI, and at the same time, many initiatives at the national, regional, and international levels that were integrating these principles and practices. But despite all these activities, despite all these background conditions, the community was still prepared to the many challenges that were brought by or posed by generative AI. And one of the things that the main argument in the introductory editorial is that there were several primary drivers of future shock that led to an AI policy and governance crisis. So what are those primary drivers? We kind of classify them in kind of two subsets of contributing factors. So on the one hand, preconditions that were absent, preconditions of readiness, preparedness for the transformation, the technological transformation that we are experiencing or we are witnessing. And this may include, gaps in the enforcement of the legal and regulatory regimes that I mentioned before. It includes as well difficulties to put principles into practice through widespread practices of ethics washing, difficulties in the legitimacy of certain processes of trustworthy AI standards, and other things. And at the same time, there were other factors that were present present factors that led to a new scale and order of risks and harms. And here we find things such as model scaling, unprecedented scaling of model size, data, compute, all the things that also led to new type of model intrinsic risks, which bring us to issues of model opacity and complexity, to issues of increasing compute costing and emergent model capabilities, to name a few. These present factors also relate to rapid like industrial scaling. So here it means like the scaling into like more downstream applications that expose more people, more communities and groups to the many risks and harms presented by these models, and at the same time that impacted many ecosystems, be it like economic, cultural, natural, in which these systems are embedded. And the third factor that was very present in this process was centralization. So just a couple of, or a few big tech companies, powerful, well-funded, with the resources, with the knowledge, compute and data to build these models, and in a way leading to economic centralization, geopolitical centralization, and also model consolidation, which risk as well perpetuating legacies of economic, geopolitical, and cultural hegemony. So what we mentioned was just how the convergence of these contributed factors of future shock led to a crisis in the AI policy and governance landscape and ecosystem. And when we did that, and when we were having a look at how that happened, we noted big tech companies that were kind of benefiting or exploiting some of these gaps that we found in the AI policy and governance landscape, the kind of leverage of the knowledge and resources asymmetries with policymakers, and also some alignment as well of their regulatory interests with geopolitical interests. And at the very heart of that crisis, a disconnection between the scope and the range of harms and risks associated with the scaling and the centralization of generative models that are of great concern for the public, and then this gap in the AI policy and governance ecosystem. So that is a bit of the overview of that introductory editorial, and of course you're all invited to have a read of it. Yeah, thank you.
That was amazing, Anto. Anto just summarized 70 pages of academic writing in 5 minutes. Brilliant. Okay, so our first speaker that's coming from online, but through a video, is Yoshua Bengio, a professor at the University of Montreal and founder and scientific director of Mila, which is the Quebec Artificial Intelligence Institute. And so you'll hear in Yoshua's words a very different point of view from much of the other contributions. This is what he'll speak about. What he did was he gave testimony to the U.S. Senate earlier in the year, and what he did for the policy forum is he took that and he kind of transformed it and updated it so that it was kind of more distilled. But go ahead, let's hear from Yoshua.
Hello, my name is Yoshua Bengio, and I'd like to tell you about my paper on government interventions to avert future catastrophic AI risks. So we first have to start with the trajectory on which we are. And if you look at the past years and decades, we are moving towards greater and greater capabilities in AI systems. And companies are now plainly saying that they're aiming for AGI systems that can be at human level or surpassing humans. Now, we can draw curves, but there is still a lot of uncertainty about when that will happen or even if it will. But given the progress in recent years, it's very likely that this could be a few decades or even a few years. And people in these companies say it could be really a few years. Okay, so what are the consequences for society? Maybe the most important thing to keep in mind is that intelligence gives power. And of course, when we build machines that are more capable at a cognitive level, it will give power to whoever controls them. Or if we lose control to these machines, which I'll talk about, they might have a power that they could use against humans. So we have to think about that possibility. So AI is dual use, and we have to be careful how we manage the potential risks that come with that. Now, in this paper, I'm also interested in this issue of loss of control. In other words, when an AI is acting on its own behalf. One way to think about it is it has a special kind of goal, a self-preservation goal. So how could that emerge? It could be that humans give it that goal, or it could be a side effect of goals that humans give it. For example, if you need to achieve some objective in general, you have to survive until you reach that point. You may have to control your environment in order to do that, and so on. So these are called instrumental goals, and they could make the AI want to preserve itself. Now, the problem really at the scientific level is that we don't know how to design an AI, how to train an AI that will not harm humans, that will be acting in a way that's aligned with our values or laws, that will not turn against us if it has a self-preservation goal. And that's a big problem. And one of my recommendations is that we urgently need to invest to find scientific solutions to this problem. But it's not sufficient to have AI systems that behave well, because the pieces of code that say, if something is not ethical, don't do it, could be removed, and could maybe make the AI more powerful. So we really need to also solve the political problem, the regulation problem, the problem of international coordination with treaties and things like that. So I proposed 3 kinds of recommendations in the paper. One, of course, has to do with national regulation and international treaties. To summarize, we need to make sure that companies only develop AI systems that are not going to harm people, and they need to be able to demonstrate that these systems are going to be safe. And right now, they wouldn't know how to do that in a satisfying way. So if governments were to ask that, there would be a whole lot more investment in research to solve this AI safety scientific problem. Second thing, we need to make sure that these systems are not going to be used in bad ways. We need to make sure that powerful systems with dangerous capabilities are secured so that they don't fall in the hands of bad actors. We need to make sure that no single person, no single corporation, no single government can abuse the power of systems that might be even smarter than humans. And finally, we need to do that investment that I've been talking about, making sure that we solve these scientific questions. How do we design systems that are going to be safe? How do we detect that a system may be unsafe? Questions to which we don't have satisfactory answers for now. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, great. So let me now introduce Nicola Solomon, who is chair of the Creators' Rights Alliance and former chief executive of the Society of Authors. She contributed an amazing piece on the relationship of GenAI to the creative industries. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, it's so interesting so far, and actually that last talk reminded me that when I bought a border collie many years ago, someone said, "Why would you buy a dog that's more intelligent than you are?" And this kind of feels like the same thing. Why are we building machines that are more intelligent than we are? And this is particularly a perspective perhaps narrowing in about what generative AI really means for the creative industries. And we represent all sorts of artists, writers, actors, musicians, illustrators, translators. And we have concerns, which are in many areas ethical, cultural, practical, and bluntly financial, which is not to say that we don't think that these are great tools and we use in great ways. Obviously, creators are known for being creative and innovative, and they embrace new tools. So once they have concerns, we should be listening. So what are our concerns? The first ones are very much about building these models, and I want to pick up on a word that was used earlier, which is human data. People who are building machines might think of things as human data, but they're not human data, they are creative work. And we have huge systems of copyright which make sure that there is a balance between public dissemination of work for the good of everybody and remunerating creators. And those have been really trodden on by companies who have simply taken creative work from the net to train large language models. And we need to be careful both about language when we talk about this. We shouldn't be talking about data. We should be talking about creative work. We shouldn't be calling machines saying that they train or that they can hallucinate. They can't. They're machines. And we have to make sure that we're putting human language on humans and machine language on machines, and which is why the concerns around human intelligence are much for me. But one of the things that policy absolutely needs to deal with is transparency about how our works have been used, credit when they've been used, allowing us to license whether or not we want them to be used for making this material, and payment for the uses so far. So that's one issue, and it's a big issue, and I think has become very clear that we need better licensing models. And so does big tech, so that it gets quality information going in. But what are other concerns when I talk about ethical? One of them is, do people really want their creative work to be made by machines? We're already seeing deep fake, we're already seeing many things being able to be done in the style of. It's never quite as good though, because what AI does, as we know, is it takes the average of the averages, and as Tom Chatsworth says, it gives you something that's plausible but slightly fuzzy. But the beauty of real creative work is it makes you see the world more sharply, more excitedly, and something new. And AI can never do that for you because it isn't generally original. So we need to make sure that we can allow that work to continue. And that's why we also have to look at the entire cultural ecosystems. Creators are already paid very badly. In every area where I represent creators, creator incomes are going down. The Society of Authors recently did a survey of AI, and something like 26% of illustrators and 36% of translators told us that they'd already lost work to generative AI, and that their income has decreased. Up to 43% of translators say not only have they lost work, but they are being paid less for the work that they are doing because of this competition. And one of the problems is, and KPMG says that 53% of writing jobs will go. And that means that the jobs that people train on and get their money on are going, and you can't go from nothing to being highly creative. So we have to have an ecosystem whereby people are paid for their work. And finally, I would just say another issue is we have to be able to find creative work. The more the machine can create work, the more it is covering up the genuine creative work underneath it. And I can give an example. I got phoned by the Daily Mail when we heard about King Charles having cancer, and who told us that immediately 230 books had come out talking about King Charles's cancer, all done by AI, all just done on probabilities. Had I written the definitive King Charles cancer book, how could you even find it amongst all of those? How could you filter out? How can we be creating trusted work? And I think the public need to know about trust. They need to know where work comes from. They need to make sure it's not deep fake. But having said all these and put them forward as problems, am I optimistic? Yes, because good, thoughtful policy can make this work for humans. And we have to understand it shouldn't be working for machines, it shouldn't be working for big tech. This should be something we should be using to enhancing human life. And if we work together and make it clear to our regulators what we want these machines to do, the ways we need to regulate them, I believe that working together we can create regulation that makes sure that the money goes back, in my case, to creators who, after all, pay taxes and therefore stimulate and get money that stimulate economies, and we can make tools that work for us. But if we don't, we are at risk of being lost in a sea of blather, as well as things very much more dangerous as have been raised before.
Thanks so much, Nicola. We can see that there are real-world problems that we need to think about here that might, in some cases, get washed over if we're thinking too much in the clouds. So our next speaker is Dr. Ranjit Singh, who's a senior researcher at Data and Society and a research fellow at the Siegel Family Endowment. Go ahead, Ranjit.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this session, and I was really happy to actually be a part of the special issue itself. Part of what I'm going to do today is to speak a little bit at the intersection of human and machine interaction that is the core of the challenge that we are currently kind of experiencing in the context of generative AI broadly. So it speaks to these particular issues that have already been raised around how to control machines and what is the consequence of these systems when it comes to human labor. But fundamentally, one of the other governance challenge that large language models raise is that their behavior is unpredictable in the context of how we kind of encounter them. So the relationship, or what I mean by this is that the relationship between input and output is not precisely predictable in the way in which the chat interfaces are organized. So it becomes increasingly more difficult to basically control the direction and intent of any conversation. And that is fundamentally the way in which a lot of the currently problematic machine content that has been currently created kind of focuses on how, to a certain extent, can be focused on whether it is people who are kind of creating and inducing bias into these systems, or whether these systems themselves are biased, and how can we actually learn the difference between them in a way. So part of the way in which we kind of, approach this particular issue is asking this larger question around how can we scale governance strategies that can match the scale at which human mischief and model misbehavior happens on large language models specifically, and generative AI more broadly. And this question, to a certain extent, became central to us when we started actually researching this invitation by the federal government in the United States in May 2023, when it invited leading developers of large language models to participate in a public red teaming event at one of the largest annual security conference known as DEF CON, which happened in Las Vegas last year. So we went there in order to understand how, to a certain extent, red teaming as an activity is kind of increasingly imagined as a solution to the problem of containing problematic machine behavior. And part of the reason why we are basically thinking through some of these issues is basically to analyze what is the core way in which red teaming kind of allows us to think about some of these issues. So broadly speaking, the purpose of red teaming, as it kind of draws its history from wargaming and cybersecurity, is to attempt to poke holes in a plan or a product where the undesirable outcome, that is lose the war or getting hacked, for example, is clear to all parties. So there is part of this way in which red teaming allows us to basically understand what could potentially go wrong before we actually deploy systems or try to basically enact a plan. And in the context of the kind of red teaming that we are looking at in the space of generative AI, it's kind of focused on post-deployment assessments of how these systems can potentially misbehave given any kind of adversarial prompt where you're basically asking the machine to do certain things that would potentially create offensive content or be a national security risk, such as basically creating information that might be accessible and can be used in order to create biological weapons and stuff like that. So the range of the ways in which these threats are imagined are pretty broad. And the way in which people imagine what can be done in order to mitigate these particular harms are also kind of equally broad. So what does this process kind of look like specifically is what we've been thinking about for the last couple of months. And one of the things that we've realized is that in general, red teaming exercises as they're done in the public domain kind of involve gathering clever people who may be, employees of the developer, external consultants, or even general public, then giving them access to either an unmoderated backend or public-facing version of a generative AI model. It could be on images, it could be on text. It depends on, how you're kind of organizing the exercise itself. Now, these clever people are then prompted, invited to prompt the system in ways that might get it to misbehave or disclose undesirable features, and then record the inputs and outputs that actually created the conditions for this kind of misbehavior. And then finally, the results of this particular exercise are then used to patch offensive, dangerous, or harmful system behaviors. And in some cases, they are collected as a part of pre-deployment vulnerabilities report as well. So, this is happening both pre-deployment as well as post-deployment. And broadly, what we are thinking about is this relationship between what is this activity of red teaming a generative AI model, what is the data that comes out of it, what is an actionable system of vulnerability disclosure that is created by such data, and then what are the potential harms to individuals and society that can be created through these exercises. Broadly, we conclude by basically thinking about how red teaming to a certain extent serves a very specific purpose in identifying risks and advancing AI accountability, but it faces substantial limits in mitigating real-world harms and holistically assessing what an AI system can potentially do. So, red teaming does have a place in the broader emerging ecosystem of efforts to map, measure, disclose, and mitigate AI harms, which kind of ranges from impact assessments and audits to participatory governance measures and incident and vulnerability reporting. But at the same time, how it is kind of organized and how do we actually know what are the kinds of ways in which we can identify potential harms of a system are currently under study. And there are a lot of different kinds of interventions that are happening in this space. And one of the things that we have been trying to basically think through in the context of not only the paper that we presented for HDSR and the special issue, but also broadly in thinking about questions of how do we actually start to take these particular exercises that are happening in the public domain as potential ways of thinking about machine misbehavior, is to basically then think about what are the ways by which we can bring in accountability mechanisms of what data is disclosed through these exercises, and then can be used in order to actually not only disclose the kind of potential ways in which machines can misbehave, and this kind of lends itself into conversations on election misinformation. It can lend itself into a conversation on what are the kinds of national security risks that some of these models may pose. But at the same time, it is also kind of a broader question around, what is it that these machines are trained on? How do we actually create domain-specific challenges around, can we basically imagine a world where, for example, there will be a proliferation of medical advice that is provided by large language models? And how do we actually account for the ways in which some of these, this information might not be correct or maybe race-based? And all of these different set of challenges around bias, how do they manifest into the kind of outputs that are being generated? So to conclude, broadly, what I want to basically bring in is the fact that, a lot of the developers and companies that are basically building these models are currently thinking about this moment of transformation where AI was initially used to discriminate tasks, in the sense of, how do you rank things? How do you basically label things as a way to basically differentiate one thing from the other? But now increasingly, we are moving in a space where AI is generating content, which inevitably means that, we are not fundamentally dealing with user-generated content. We are dealing with AI-generated content, which seems to imply that there is a company behind it. And you could potentially see that, there is a way by which there's a direct correlation that can be drawn between what a model is saying and what a company believes in. And that relationship has increasingly turned a lot of this conversation around generative AI to be about content policy, which is very different from the ways in which larger questions of security have been historically thought about. And that transformation is crucial in understanding this current moment of generative AI. Thank you.
We will now hear from Jean-Louis Fondy, who is Associate Professor at the University of DERI in Cameroon, and Research Director on Digital Rights and Innovation at Afro Leadership. Go ahead, Jean-Louis.
Thank you so much, David. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much, especially for putting in place such a timely and important platform to discuss about AI as it is gaining momentum presently. So the work I'm doing presently, because what I've said for the special issue is just, let's say, the type of the iceberg. So it is about from left behind to left out, generative AI, or the next pen of the unconnected. I've been working with marginalized community, with unconnected people, trying to connect them since like 10 years now. And lately I realized that this segment, especially the unconnected, is a kind of neglected segment in the race of technology, and especially AI. And according to the International Telecommunication Union, presently, we have around 2.7 billion people, or 1/3 of the world, uh, remaining unconnected up to now. And that particular portion is mainly in landlocked developing country and least developing country, and representing 2/3 of the population over there. And the main challenge is not only about the connectivity, because behind the connectivity, there's another challenge with the low digital literacy level of those people. So being left behind in terms of internet access prevent this community from benefiting not only from online information, but also from generative AI tools. We all know after the launch of ChatGPT, most of the country without access to such a tool was mainly in Africa. There's a kind of correlation, that period between the access to such a tool and the penetration rate, the internet penetration rate in those countries. So, and this this will only exacerbate the inequality between countries, those who have access to technology and those who don't have. And but this is just the beginning of the pen, because generative AI systems are based on data. So they are trained using content, and most of the content they are using is mainly online content, not offline content, mainly online content. So, and those online content didn't consider or do not include the reality of people who are still unconnected. I will try just to maybe make a small comment related to what Rachel said previously regarding creative works. So if we try to generate maybe a scene or a pic or an image or even a song from those areas using the tools we have presently, we realize that it is not really real, or it is not realistic, or it is not really similar to what we can observe from those areas. So, and with generative AI system, we are in a kind of cycle or a loop where a generative new models will use online content to generate new content that will be reused later to generate or to develop new generative AI tools. And we are in the kind of cycle without considering rural areas. I would like to just take an example of the goat that eats paper. So this is a short story. It's a short story in the paper, but this happened in a market room in Cameroon, and a teacher was reading the copy of a student, and he started laughing out, saying that, oh, the guys has written that a goat can eat paper. And the other teachers joining started also laughing at the student, but one teacher in the home say, that's true in my village, that's true. And after that, they started now to reconsider the copy of that student. They are living in the same country, but they are facing different realities. I'm talking about Cameroon. And if we develop now, just imagine that we develop a generative AI system that can help to mark automatically the student copies without that knowledge. And I tried to check it that time using ChatGPT, and I asked if God can eat paper, and ChatGPT said no. And later, I asked Google Bot at that time, and Google Bot said no. And if this happens, please bring it to the vet immediately. So, but today the answer is somehow acceptable because they acknowledge that yes, this can happen, but it is not normal. So, but we really need to pay attention, especially including the realities of marginalized community during the development of AI system. Not only involving them during the process, but involving at the beginning of data collection to make sure that the data we are collecting are not biased toward their realities. So, and this is that's why I would like you to pay a look to the global south also when designing policy and so on regarding AI system. So they are already left behind in terms of internet access, and we need to pay attention because they should not be left out in the development of AI systems. And one important point I would like maybe to mention is about languages. In Nigeria, for instance, they have more than 500 languages. In Cameroon, we have more than 217 languages, local languages. So, and yes, I have also to admit that there are some works trying to develop a LLM system considering under-resourced languages, but the number of languages, it is too much for the moment, too much that are not considered in the development of those systems. And if we are not paying attention, the frequencies of extensions of those languages will increase with the penetration rate of technology that do not consider those languages. I would like to use one statement of Frederick, who said that a different language is a different vision. So we have to preserve the different visions we have in our world today. And I will end my talk or my first input by the statement of Andrew Ng. He said that what we need today is not bigger data, but better data. And since we are reaching the saturations of generative AI model, we need to reconsider the type of data and the origin of data that are used to train all those generative AI models. Maybe later we can also discuss a bit about other works we are doing presently, about especially creating now, because I think Joshua said previously, he talked about the centralizations. I think one approach presently should be a with decentralizations, especially in data productions. And we can leverage things like community networks that can presently, they are used to connect the unconnected in rural or remote areas, but we can leverage those infrastructure to also help to collect or to produce local and relevant data for those communities that can help later to train AI system that will not be too much harmful for them. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Jean-Louis. I will now introduce Shmyla Khan, who's an independent researcher on gender and digital rights and the former policy director at the Digital Rights Foundation, Pakistan. Go ahead, Shmyla.
Hi, everyone. I will just let me, I'm going to set up the time so that I don't speak for longer. Thank you so much for having this really very important and ever timely conversation, and for the congratulations on the publication of the edition. I today sort of in my paper, and this is what I would like to explore, the ways in which discourse around AI and policymaking and regulation of AI plays out, particularly the ways in which it is passively consumed and then um, copy pasted within the global south. And obviously, there are gradations and nuances within what we mean by that. But largely, that sort of raising questions about who gets to regulate and be part of conversations around AI policymaking, and also the kind of language around emergency, and the urgency to regulate AI at the same pace at which AI is developing engenders a kind of a policy panic where these exclusions are enhanced even more, but at the same time also mirrors the kind of non-transparent ways, as some of the earlier speakers had pointed out, development of technology takes place. It ends up being replicated into the policy space. And when we talk about both development of AI technology and then regulation of AI technology, we've seen that the global south is often seen as a mere passive recipient of this technology, only brought in when we need to demonstrate a worst case scenario, or this kind of AI gone bad in an authoritarian regime scenario. That's when these sort of countries and these populations and the relationship to AI and what regulation would mean in that context comes into play. And it often takes very legitimate worries around and anxieties around AI and the pace at which generative AI, especially and its application, is progressing to sort of hasten and sort of quicken the pace at which this regulation should be taking place, rather than this kind of slow deliberation that is inclusive, that gives space for imagining different kinds of regulation, and also acknowledgement of the ways in which we have failed through legal instruments, through policy instruments, to regulate technology adequately in a way that is equitable, in a way that is just. And often we have seen the ways in which AI regulation and it shows up in the global south is through sort of this filtering down of so-called best practices that have already been passed in the West. And it often ends up not only not really speaking to the realities in which it is applied, much like AI and its application of that technology. It often comes at the same kind of breakneck speed with it empowers governments who are often the ones who are misusing this technology to regulate it, creating this kind of paradox for the people in these spaces. And because there is such a trickle-down effect of this kind of panic around AI, it is regurgitated by many governments in the global south to examples in the global north are often sort of quoted to bring in hasty or, dare I say, bad regulation around AI. And to to conclude, this kind of regulation ends up empowering states who are often the perpetrators, and often tries to regulate companies who don't feel accountable to the global south in the first place. They raise jurisdictional issues. Very few of these companies are really taking into concerns of the global south. They're constantly in conversation with these big regulations that are coming either in the EU or in other sort of jurisdictions. Sort of there is never the global south is never given, the door is never open for them to be part of these conversations in a meaningful way that goes beyond any kind of tokenism. And again, just to conclude, it does not. It's also a resource and power issue where the kind of resources and expertise and the time to build understanding of this regulation in particular contexts is often denied in the global south, which is often the economically strapped. These things are not given the same kind of value. So that is also something that sort of is a big hindrance, and the lack of expertise is often then exploited or sort of taken advantage of by regulatory states, where regulation does not often equal good regulation. And that's all. Thank you so much. I hope that I've been well in time.
Thank you so much, Shmyla. And just to say, with apologies, Nicola has a previous commitment that she has to go to. So we're going to now hear from Tamara Knies, who is a senior researcher at Data and Society and project director of its Algorithmic Impact Methods Lab. She's also assistant professor of media at the University of San Francisco, and she's dialing in from California. Go ahead, Tamara.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for the invite. It's great to be with everyone here to celebrate the launch of this timely special issue. I would argue that we can't talk about the future shock of technology without addressing the threat that generative AI poses to our climate. Many of the problems that are part of the current AI boom were also part of the crypto hype cycle before it. The entire computing industry also relies on mining, manufacturing, shipping, use, and disposal practices that take an environmental and human toll, and generative AI is particularly resource intensive. Terms like AI, data center, and compute can obscure the disparities and forms of labor behind these technologies. So when we think about measuring and mitigating the climate impacts of AI across the supply chain and across its life cycle, it requires attention to what such terms obscure. Power can refer to both the energy consumption and power dynamics related to computation. There's a massive amount of compute needed to train generative AI, which requires specialized chips to run high energy workloads. And in addition to specialized chip design and fabrication, data centers, of course, also contribute to AI's environmental impacts. Recently, Dustin Edwards, Zane Cooper, and Mel Hogan published a crucial intervention defining the data center's relationship to colonialism and global supply chains. Data centers also require large amounts of water for on-site server cooling and off-site electricity generation, as well as energy for training and inference. And resource-intensive data centers impact different parts of the world unevenly. Putting a data center in a drought-stricken area could be detrimental to the people, other species, and habitats there. Within tech companies and the green software movement, which I was sort of a part of in my role at Intel, you might see energy supply chains presented as carbon intensity data, which is intended to help developers make greener decisions about when they train models. But developers don't often have control over their own workflows. If managers don't support this work, it won't happen. In tech circles and climate pledges, there's a tendency to focus on greenhouse gas emissions at the expense of other environmental factors. There's a problem with fetishizing carbon, particularly when carbon offsets are another point of financialization and exploitation, such as when carbon offsets are used to justify colonialism in the Amazon in the name of regenerative finance. Too often for tech companies, searching for the perfect data and the act of measurement in and of itself is the end of the story, which often fails to translate into meaningful structural change. Net zero and other climate targets are common for major companies, and there's been a rapid growth of climate tech through VC funding, attempting to find a solution to the climate crisis through technology. A Salesforce ad from a couple of years ago used the actor Matthew McConaughey, and it was a play on all of the billionaire space exits. Matthew McConaughey is featured in an astronaut suit. And the new frontier is planet Earth, which will be more sustainable thanks to companies like Salesforce. But as we've seen with the growth of generative AI, companies like Microsoft, for example, are blowing way past their emissions targets because of their new data centers, which themselves are carbon intensive to manufacture. AI is also being used to accelerate oil extraction, and the overall energy demand is growing in a way that outpaces existing renewable energy infrastructure, which is straining the grid and leading to the revival of coal plants. Meanwhile, the workers within tech companies who are focused on accountability, including corporate responsibility, RAI, and sustainability teams are being cut or undermined. Beyond what individual developers within companies can do to make AI more energy efficient and less carbon and water intensive, impending regulation like the AI Environmental Impact Act of 2024 in the US, policymakers should listen to the communities on the front lines of climate change who are already using technologies for their own climate protection purposes. For example, I recently co-organized a fact tutorial with Lori Reggiatiri and Bogdana Rakova, along with Marta Fellows-Dorado and Jai Alves from IPAM, which is a Brazilian research center focused on climate in the Amazon, and their Somai platform, which relies on co-design and governance with indigenous communities who use the platform to protect their territories. Technologists and policymakers should center the perspectives of communities and treat them as experts rather than caving to climate techno-solutionism or greenwashing regimes where empiricism can be used to obscure the full spectrum of socio-technical impacts while making it hard to see just how technologies could be useful to communities who are already experiencing climate catastrophe. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamara, and I'll plug your book on tech solutionism. It's wonderful. Okay, so now I will turn to Rachel Coldicutt, who is founder and executive director of the research consultancy Care Industries and its kind of sister social enterprise, Promising Trouble. Previously, Rachel was the CEO of .Everyone. Go ahead, Rachel.
Now, I'm going to have to ask, I'm sorry, if you could either raise the light or turn it off, because I will get a migraine and then be no use to anyone at all. If that's okay, the light at the back, because I can't sit here looking at that. If that's okay? Maybe I'll just begin while we're waiting for that, but I'm going to have to sit side on, so sorry. So, I am not an academic, but I've been working in tech for 30 years, right? And I've seen lots of hype come and go, and lots of different things that people get excited about, you know. And one of the things that happens in the industry is that basically, like, maybe this began a little bit with Steve Jobs. People like standing up and giving sort of mysterious, like crazy religious talks that like make it look like they're really cool and really clever and doing slightly mysterious things. And I couldn't help but notice that over the last couple of years, AI, which is a very intangible, disparate, distributed set of hundreds of different things, had become a thing that people spoke about in a very magical, almost religious way. And I think last spring, so I don't know if anyone remembers, we were like at the height of AI hype. We were at the hype of like suddenly, I remember being in my local supermarket, which is not the place that I generally encounter narratives about AI, oddly, and seeing the cover of a tabloid, the Daily Star, which is not kind of where I would really normally be looking for my tech insight. And there was a picture of a robot on the cover with hazard tape, and it said, "The robots are coming to kill you," right? And it felt to me like that was a moment when it's like, we've gone a bit far here, I think, maybe. We could sort of pull it back a bit. And so the essay that I wrote for this special edition is about that kind of narrative hyperbole, about how, like, when the smart people say they're right, people listen, and sometimes they're afraid to question them. And I think to particularly pick up from something from Yoshua Bengio, power is not intelligence. Power is wealth, money, status. It's having a platform, it's having influence. Power is the ability to make decisions that have material effects on people's lives. It's not just being smart, right? And one of the things I felt was very interesting about the way that narrative around AI has developed over the last year is there were a group of men, always men, who would say that they were so incredibly intelligent that they had made a thing that was more intelligent than all the rest of us, that was going to kill us, and they had to be stopped. Now, it seems to me that if you were incredibly intelligent and you thought you had made a thing that was really terrible, you would not make it, right? And that the fact that rather than not making it, you were telling everyone that you were just really smart, seemed to me not to quite add up. And so I suppose while there is, I think, lots of complexity, lots of truth in the fact that we are making technologies we don't understand, it isn't the case that we are on the verge of a loss of control to technology. We're on the verge, and maybe it's already happened, of loss of control to billionaires, to computer scientists, to people who say they're better than everybody else. And I don't think really that that is what innovation ought to do, you know. And while sometimes, you know, I don't want to be in a place where I sound like I'm being dreary or miserable or saying that technology doesn't have potential. It absolutely does. But the best of it offers opportunities to everyone. And I think that is where we ought to be putting our time and efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I think at its best, our contributions they take the critical perspective, and there's no better contribution than yours for that. So last but not least is Shmyla Khan, who's a researcher from the Alan Turing Institute and a member of a colleague and a member of Anto and my team. And Shmyla will talk about one of the contributions on power in the public interest.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to try and keep it like as short as possible because I know a lot more people might have questions. But just to quickly give you an overview of the paper, which was titled Frontier AI, Power in the Public Interest. This was actually written by a number of the members of the Data Ethics Group, which is the largest interest group in the Turing Institute with over 150 members. Of course, only a small number of them actually got together to write this paper, and it is fantastic. And to just pick up on a few of the themes that were addressed in it, and of course responding to the question of generative AI and power and the public interest, the first most important thing is to understand that this there's this insistent on a Western-centric Californian ideology that supports market capture and economic pursuits. But this is almost fundamentally at odds with what these tech firms put up on their websites of AI for good, and we're going to use this to, you know, launch our techno-deterministic notions that this is going to be the future and technology will save us all. And they are at odds with each other because this technology, if anything, is magnifying some of these problems rather than actually working well to mitigate them. And what's very curious about this and what the paper tries to bring out is how these tech firms, often based in the transatlantic, often have the agenda setting power to actually make some of those decisions, to lobby in terms of their own interests, and to be able to make the policy decisions that work better for them, and most importantly, their shareholders rather than the public, the larger public. The other issue that we touch upon is the regulatory gap and how it often tends to be very focused on technical solutions without looking at the larger scheme of things. And this is where some of the aspects of public interest washing often tend to come up as well. And I know a lot of the speakers have already spoken about this. So I'm quickly going to move on to the next point, which I personally see as one of the more worrying trends that with a lot of tech firms, which is the rentiership models that a lot of them have, wherein we tend to buy into these packages of services that these large tech firms offer. And at any point when they control all of this software, the hardware, the storage, it is very easy for them to limit your access to it, be it by increasing the prices of goods, by limiting your access to it, saying, this was a free version, you now need to pay so much more for that. So the individual who might have thought, maybe I'll introduce ChatGPT to interact with customers is no longer keen on using that, but is so entrenched in the system because they've built an entire business model based on a service that they brought from someone else. So this is, I guess, some of the aspects that is covered in this paper. And I do want to say that it doesn't merely criticize the whole realm of the tech domain right now. There are very, very important solutions, or at least policy directions that we can look forward to in the future, which maybe in the questions we can address better.
Thanks, Shmyla. Okay, so we have run a bit over on the presentations, but we'll now open it up to audience questions. And while everyone's thinking of their question, we'll have a few mics that will circulate around. Let me start with maybe one question for. I'll maybe start with Shmyla, if that's okay, and then for anybody else who wants to contribute to the conversation. So, Shmyla, I'm thinking about your contribution and Jean-Louis' contribution and the contribution that Shmyla was talking about. So, and also the editorial introduction. I think one of the points that really comes out is we do have this kind of disconnect in the AI governance, policy and governance conversation between the kind of dominating themes and interests that have so far shaped the kind of AI safety conversation as such. So a disconnect between that and the actual concerns, right? And the questions that are being raised, right, from what we could call the majority world, right? So I'm just wondering what you think some of the steps forward might be in correcting that disconnect. What can we do as a society to start addressing the listening gaps and the gaps in voice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One that I think about often, because having been part of this space, I think for a long time, even in tech and even when policy makers want to be inclusive, our experience has been that it's very superficial. It's often in response to something really horrible that has happened, and sort of trying to put band-aids on it. And the way that sort of even consultation processes that I've experienced in this space are structured, it is very much about sort of bringing in perspectives, but never having those perspectives set the agenda for or the terms for how this conversation is going to take place. And that's obviously reflective of power, and we don't operate in a vacuum and the material reality that underpins it. But that is very, very essential, because oftentimes when we're in spaces where, for example, like I've worked extensively the South Asian region in terms of that policy space, or generally the global South, the conversations are very sort of what takes precedent and what is discussed is very different, and you can feel that kind of disjunct. So I think that at a starting point, how we choose to have these conversations, the terms in which they have, And ultimately, I think unless we take proactive measures to ensure that the kind of power dynamic that is there, it's usually sort of this kind of exercise in futility where you're just going to check these boxes that we consulted X many people from the global south, and then ultimately the people taking those decisions do it in a fairly untransparent way. And I think that happens not just to the global south. I think even actors within the global north are often sort of have the doors shut on them, right before sort of regulation is being. So I think it's obviously a larger question of how we engage in policymaking and not just tech. But I think, as Samita pointed out quite correctly, that the fact that we have these big tech giants and their ability to lobby, I think, is something that we also really need to dilute, because it adds that kind of additional power dynamic. I've seen even, for example, in Pakistan, the ways in which sort of behind closed doors tech companies are able to sort of, even though we're pushing them on regulation, that actually sort of safeguards these tech companies as well from, but they're able to sort of use their capital and that sort of their influence even within the government. So I think we need to demand more transparency for them. But the roadmap for how we're going to do that is very difficult. Right now seems quite bleak, but I think the first thing that I think they can start with is more transparency and pushing them on transparency and constantly sort of pointing these things out. I think a lot of people try to do that with just being a nuisance to them or in these rooms. I think that's that's probably the most valuable contribution that all of us can make. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we did get we do have a question from online, which is anyone working on ethics for the use of AI in war? So thinking about the military use case, or are there any thoughts on this? If anybody online has a thought on this, please share. You can just unmute yourself. I will say, actually, I'll respond to this one because this is somewhat up my street. So recently, there's this UN advisory board now that's working on thinking through the next kind of steps and how the UN is going to intervene in this space. And they've been I'm a consultant in this project, and they've been calling these kind of working sessions together. And they had one on generative AI and AI frontier, so-called frontier AI, as it relates to peace and security. And I think one of the things that's come out of that conversation for me is that the problem of dual use. So the problem that across all of these AI applications, one can have very positive and beneficial uses, but then one can also weaponize the technologies in one way or another. This should keep us up at night. I mean, this is a real problem in terms of how, for instance, the departments of defense at a given country will try to take the technology and take the various potentials of the technology and try to mobilize it for the purposes of increasing lethality or increasing efficiency in battlefield decision making, things like that. And so we do see a kind of what the UN special advisor on I think it's defense and technology, what he has called a kind of race for speed, where you've got increasing automation of certain battlefield decision making using things like reinforcement learning in contexts where the advantage to a particular country will be that they will be more lethal quicker, making decisions that impact on scaled human life. And so I'll just point out that it is a real deficiency in the policy forum itself that we didn't explore that, or we haven't yet explored that. The contributions are still open, so if there's anybody out there listening or in the audience that has an interest in this and wants to contribute, please send us a contribution on this. But this is a real problem that we should have a more vocal public conversation about. Go ahead.
So I think as well, one of the things we need to acknowledge that we do not talk about is that the majority of the technology that we use today in consumer settings has been created for military means. So since the 40s, the biggest forcing function in R&D has been defense, and that we pretend very often that isn't the case and act surprised when we find out that things, you know, for instance, GPS is, you know, a technology that was created for the surveillance and targeting, not to get us home on a time. And so I think not only is it really important to address that, but it's equally important to ask that there's an investment that goes into other kinds of innovation that is not, you know, focused on power, that is maybe focused on care, well-being, and that I think in terms of one of the things we can see that is happening at the moment is that there's a tiny number of technology companies who have a monopoly. They are selling to the highest bidder. The highest bidder is normally the aggressor. We know, for instance, that Israel has access to extraordinary technologies, and that changes everything for everyone, and I think it ought to be at the heart of the conversation.
Go ahead, Shmyla. Yeah.
I think, again, completely agree with everything you've just said, and a lot of these governance questions are same regardless of whether it's military use or general use. There's this belief that existing principles that we have will apply, that we had for general, you know, rules of war will also apply in the case of technology being used. So, you know, jus in bello and jus ad bellum on how you're going to be, the reasons why you're engaging in war, and the proportionality principle, for instance. But we've already seen that even without the use of this, there has been an erosion of all of those you know, things that should protect people in the times of war. So it does it, which is also similar to what happens in general, you know, AI use, where people are being, that there are instances of bias or discrimination in the use of these systems, but how well do people have avenues to, you know, get accountability for that, to have their claims be heard, to get that justice for that injustice that had been caused to them. And I think more I say practically, but what some countries have tried to do to limit a lot of what they see as aggressor countries getting access to some of this technology is limiting the physical supply chain elements of it. We saw in the US over the last few months has limited China's access to GPU and semiconductor production lines, which has already limited their ability to maybe use it for that. But again, I'm not saying that any of these countries are these kind of policies are going to change anything, but it does point to a general trend that we see in AI governance, be it in military or general use, where there are that this is going to try and build on existing principles, rights, and protections that we have, and the other part, which is maybe it's just going to come down to how we can control resources and who's going to be part of that conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, right in the front here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. I'm interested in the game theory part of this in terms of international control. When, having studied colonialism and all the very bad things we white males have done to the world, the lesson I learned from it was that we could. And that the people that didn't have the technologies, the social organizations and all the other stuff, who either by accident or by choice didn't have those, basically really bad things happened to them at length and at scale. How do we avoid handicapping ourselves in a world where there are places like China and Russia which don't share our values, and no plausible thing that the United Nations will do will make them share our values or not use a technology that they think will advance them. You know, you say, don't use this particular type of AI in warfare. You say that to someone in Tel Aviv, Gaza, Kiev, or Moscow, they'll just stare at you until you go away. How do we avoid not being the done-tos in the future world?
I have a view on this, which I'll share and would welcome anybody who's online or on the panel to share as well. And just to say, this might be our last question because we are running a bit over. So my view is that, you know, the world is a lot bigger than the US, China, Europe, and Russia. And we're in a position now where there needs to be a strengthening of the agency of all different parts of the world, in the sense that, for instance, the activity now in AI governance and policy has shifted from a specific kind of anchoring in the North to a broader transversal conversation between regions in Africa, Central and South America, and other parts of the world. And I think the geopolitics are more complicated now than they were. In a sense, we need to look beyond just, you know, the old kind of realpolitik, powerpolitik that we thought about when we would think about technology policy before. You probably would disagree with that, but I think for me, the future of constraining behavior has to be one which involves the voices that haven't been included before, and we are taking steps in that direction. Just to say, for instance, UNESCO is driving a really important conversation in sub-Saharan Africa, in East Asia, in South and Central America, on how to sort of regionally build readiness to sort of empower these areas so that they can have more parity in driving the conversation on responsible AI. So it doesn't address the geopolitical issues that you were talking about, but I just think that the coordinates are changing in this world as we move beyond the kind of polarized world of realpolitik.
Yeah, maybe to add something to that, I'm also when you present this, I'm also thinking on some marginalized communities who, for them, the bad actors are within their own country. So I think this also tells a lot about what are the conversations that we're having, what are the things that we need to put, you know, into the table and prioritize. And I think maybe go into some like more the kind of policy and governance initiatives that are out there and like are really making good transformations or really good work. Has to do a lot on working with these communities, kind of decentering the conversations around AI, responsible AI, and what are the impacts, what are the actions to take, and so on. And there are many things that, unfortunately, it's more happening at more grassroots levels, civil society organizations, research communities, etc., that are bringing some of these conversations up to like and centering them and working directly with the marginalized and decentralized communities. And I think that some of these approaches need to be also implemented at a more global and regional levels.
So we have two things to do. First, we have to thank all of our speakers who are also contributors to the policy forum. And the second thing we need to do is just, we are just about to play you a video because we're also, at this moment today, launching something called the AI Ethics and Governance in Practice platform for the public sector. As I mentioned before, this thinking about constructive views forward, this is a program that started over 5 years ago that was originally the UK's National AI Ethics and Governance Guidance that has now been transformed into an online platform and an 8-module sort of training program. And so right now we're going to launch the online platform of that training program. And so if I could ask that video to play us out, as it were.
The AI Ethics and Governance in Practice platform provides resources to help the public sector integrate ethical values into AI projects from design to delivery. The platform helps AI project teams learn from a curriculum about ethical AI developed by the Alan Turing Institute, train by participating in group activities that bring the curriculum's key concepts to life, and implement a custom framework in your organization's projects, including specially designed templates and tools. The program is composed of 8 modules, each covering a key topic such as sustainability, fairness, and responsible data stewardship. Each of the modules also focuses on a specific sector, such as transport or healthcare, so that case studies can animate the key concepts and promote ethical reflection. Each module also includes a set of related activities, which can be used in workshops to promote team learning and discussion. Activities are presented as digital whiteboards or downloadable documents, which can be used for collaborative workshops, whether in person or online. To implement our framework into your organization's projects, tools and downloadable templates are provided to help plot and record your project's actions, roles, and responsibilities. Together, these features help support skills enlargement and the implementation of ethical practices throughout an AI project's lifecycle. Find out more at aiethics.turing.ac.uk.
Okay, and just to say, we know this is good because Shmyla and Anto have both been, and myself, we've all engineered this program together. So anyway, thank you so much. Really appreciate